And we are now recording. Okay, so today we're going to start with augmentative and alternative communication. We're going to look at the major communication needs of persons with disabilities and identify major characteristics of AAC devices and why is this important to know. So even if you're not directly involved with augmentative communication, some of your clients may need to use AAC or are using AAC. So by being familiar with the basic issues and being aware of AAC and services, you're going to be better prepared to consider how the assistive technology that you're dealing with may impact the use of that AAC system. You can also consider integration issues if that's appropriate, and you can refer the client to specific AAC service providers, or at least inform the client that options do exist for them. So how do we communicate? Well, speech is typically the first way we think about, right, to communicate, but all of us augment our speech with other communication strategies, and this includes writing and gesturing and using the phone, right? People with severe speech and or motor control impairments may use additional techniques that are typically referred to as augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. AAC helps facilitate that interaction, right? The device or technology for AAC helps them facilitate being independent in their communication. So two main communication methods. The first is expressive. This is when we're conveying a message through speech. We might be using facial expressions or gestures, maybe even sign language, or might be using an AAC system if the person has severe speech or motor control impairments. And the other main form of communication is receptive, and this is when we're receiving or understanding a message that's being communicated to us. It includes listening, auditory processing. It also involves all the senses to understand nonverbal cues. So we're thinking about tactile, we're talking about smell, visual, movement or kinesthetic, and then sound or auditory. So the primary goal of AAC is to facilitate conversation so that a person can express their wants and needs, they can transfer information, they can achieve social closeness, as well as achieve social etiquette. Some of the different ways that we can interact, so our interaction strategies that we're going to use in order to have a conversation is initiation, greetings, requests, information exchange, commenting, as well as conversational repair. And many times when an AAC system, when they're being first developed, vocabulary selected is a lot of times only for choice making, right? We don't always give the individual ways to greet or comment, right? So for instance, is an example of a client who came in for an evaluation with a communication wallet, okay, so very low tech, that contained a very comprehensive selection of only food choices, right? And there were no other pictures within that wallet. And the caregiver actually said, all he ever talks about is food. Well, yeah, if that's all he has available to him, that's all he's going to talk about. And the client ended up actually surprising everyone, and particularly his caregivers, with what he was able to do in the evaluation with all types of communication. So it's important to represent a variety of all of these interactions, even if you're only at an introductory level for those clients who are still learning the communication functions. So communication has a huge effect on AAC. So if we think about natural speech and our natural speech rate, we're looking at 150 to 250 words per minute. So for people not able to use their speech and having to rely on symbol systems and input devices to communicate, their rate is going to be so much slower. So other strategies are essential for effective communication, which we're going to talk about. Because if you look at, a single finger, so if all you're doing is hunting and pecking with one finger, you're going to be on average about 10 words per minute. And if you're using single switch scanning, it's only about 5 words per minute. So that is a huge difference. So we need a lot of different strategies to increase that speed. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. So besides spoken communication, we have graphic or written communication, right? That's one of our goals, is to be able to communicate through writing. So for writing, we need to be able to make lists, give people short messages like through an email, or maybe writing something more formally, such as for school, or a report for business. Note taking is also very important, but it can be difficult to do due to the speaker's rate of communication and the ability of the user to summarize the information as notes. People have often used tape recorders and human note takers to address this need. So Janice Light defined communicative competence as having 4 components. The first is to expand or improve operational competence. And this directly relates to using a device, being able to use the features of the device, including the human technology interface, and mechanisms for adding or expanding the available vocabulary or messages. Second is to expand or improve linguistic competence. So this refers to a person's ability to manipulate or use language. Thirdly is to expand or improve social competence. This is an extremely important capability, and you need to be able to address the ability to improve social closeness and etiquette. And then finally, we have to expand or improve strategic competence. So being able to optimize the content and speed of communication and to repair misinterpreted messages. And let's talk real quick again about receptive language. So we talked about receptive communication, where this is, things being communicated to us. And in regards to AAC, we need to look at ways to increase understanding of language through what's called aided language stimulation. So we're teaching and modeling that receptive language, as well as being a communication partner. So aided language input is a communication strategy that requires a communication partner to teach symbol meaning and be able to model symbolic communication by pairing speech with graphic symbols or some other form of aided augmentative and alternative communication. So thinking about like when you're first starting to use, a communication board with a young child with pictures and words, we need to be able to get them to understand that if I point to the picture of, let's say, the pretzels, I'm saying that I would like pretzels, please. Aided language stimulation specifically is a language approach where the facilitator points out picture symbols on the communication device or display while there is ongoing language stimulation in the environment, right? So it's an interactive demonstration to teach the concept of using those picture symbols. An AA system includes a lot of different things, but first let's talk about low-tech or non-electronic devices. So we have manual communication boards or books, so they can be pictures, they can be, symbol-based, they can have words, they can have letters. They can be eye gaze boards, so it's a picture that's listed, shown here is an eye gaze board, which is just a piece of clear plexiglass with the middle cut out. And you see the letters on there, and there's a couple words on there, and there's different colors. So when the user looks at, let's say, yellow, and then looks over into the top left corner where it's ABC, I'm now designated that the word that I'm trying to communicate starts with a B, okay? Low tech and non-electronics, they're also very important because they're used as backup to our higher tech systems, because it is technology. It's not an if it breaks, it's when it breaks, or when it, it is not charged, or when the batteries die, or when it needs maintenance. We need a backup in place. AAC systems are often grouped, right, with that no tech, low tech, which we're talking about, and then we'll talk about high tech as well. But the no tech systems are those that do not require any material or device to communicate. So think about sign language. Okay. Low tech systems are typically non-electronic and they're not computer based. They are often referred to as manual AAC systems. In this slide here, you can see 4 different types. So you've got a communication book with pictures and symbols. You have an I-transfer system or an E-tran. You have a visual support for behavior, and you have an aided language stimulation activity. So a lot of different things that you can do with low and no tech. High-tech systems are typically electronic and most often are microprocessor or computer-based. Sometimes users prefer manual systems because they engage the receiver of communication a little bit more, but they're needed as backup systems to the high-tech systems that we talked about, and they're needed in environments or situations where the electronic or computer systems aren't going to work as well. So think about like a really noisy environment. A high-tech voice output device may be difficult to hear. So having a low-tech as a backup would be a good idea in those situations. So our more high-tech is going to be our speech generating devices. So our low-tech is going to be more of our non-speech generating AAC devices. And these are typically symbol or alphabet boards, whereas our speech generating devices, also referred to as SGDs, but also called VOCAs, a voice output communication aid. These are high-tech devices, but they can also be what's also called mid-tech, where it's kind of in between low and high. They're still electronic based, but they're not as expensive, such as a voice recorded device like the Big Mac by AbleNet. All right, look familiar? The human technology interface. This was introduced back in the Access module. This also pertains to AAC. In each of these areas within this technology, human technology interface must be considered as it relates to the client's needs and their abilities in order to identify the specific features that are going to be required in each of these categories. So we're going to talk about each of these 4 points. And the main things we're looking at is the input device or the control interface, right? How are we going to control it? What's our selection set, so our symbol set? What's the layout or arrangement of the device? And then what selection method are we using? So first is our input device or control interface. Right, there's a lot of different ways that we can access AAC. You've got keyboards, you've got single switch or switch arrays. Joysticks can be used. Actually, a wheelchair joystick can be used. Mouse emulation systems, as well as eye gaze, can be used to interact with an AAC device. So here we have, so that was our input. Now we have our selection or our symbol set. So we can start with objects. So if the individual isn't quite ready to use pictures, we can introduce actual objects and pair them with symbols and words. We can then have pictures or icons, so different symbol sets that are available out there. You could do line drawings, or you can do actual photographs, which is a really nice way to go as well, especially when you're communicating about specific people. You can take pictures of them. And then you have your traditional orthography. So this is, our letters, our words. Next is our display layout or the arrangement of the device. And this is the layout of the symbols or the choices that we have available is critical for optimizing speed and accuracy. So these charts we're taking, we're taking row column scanning into consideration with these 2 pictures that we have here. So in the chart on the left, the square or cell that a person can get to fastest using row column scanning is the top left square. And the bottom right will be the slowest. So the chart on the right shows the letters placed according to frequency of use, and the space being used most frequently with the T and the E close behind it. So this is going to help optimize our scanning if we're using letters to spell words. Okay. I'm not sure, ROCOM, I'm not sure what that is. The question about, are you saying ROCOM? Row column, sorry, row column. All right, so here's another type of display, and it's this one's optimized for direct selection of words. And specifically, it's word power, and it was developed by Nancy Inman as an alternative to traditional on-screen keyboards, combining a core vocabulary, spelling, and word prediction. So Olga's asking, does a row column scan always require 3 switch activation to make a selection? So if it's auto, it's going to automatically start scanning, so I don't have to worry about starting it. And it's going to hit the first row. So let's say if it's a first row, it's in the first row. Let's say we're going for like the letter A. I'm going to hit the switch to activate the first row, and then once it, or first column, and then once it hits the row for the A, I'm going to hit my switch again. So in that situation, it's only 2 switch activations. So it all just depends on how your arrangement, how your layout is set up, how many switch activations you need to make a selection. Okay. So with word power, so let's talk a little bit more about this one. It takes advantage of the fact that a core vocabulary of 100 words accounts for roughly 50% of the spoken communication, the spoken language. Word prediction and spelling are used for the other 50%. So keep in mind that words are organized so that you can select from left to right to communicate a sentence, and the row of words under the message window are generated with word prediction. So if you look at this again, you're going to see that we're having the top core vocabulary, then we have our spelling with our word prediction. Okay. Okay, next in that human technology interface is that selection method. So for AAC, a great deal of attention is paid to this selection method that we're using. Speed enhances a person's ability to communicate and the use of a slower selection method interferes with that goal. Okay, so remember when we looked at, scanning, it's about 5 words per minute. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to optimize that speed and accuracy. And the method a person uses should optimize the speed as well as the accuracy for communication. So if it's not, then we need to potentially look at a different selection method. So these selection methods were discussed in the Axis module, and this is just a quick review. So why don't we do a little quiz here, and you tell me what's direct selection. This is a really easy one. You can unmute yourself or type into the chat window. Hand or eyes, right? Picking letters or symbols by hand using a stylus, using eye gaze is direct selection. What about scanning? Explain one of those scanning methods. Okay, so we're using a switch, but item by item versus group item, row column, or having or quartering. What's one that you can explain with that scanning? And yes, we're using switches, but what's the scanning portion of it? Okay, so row column is you're choosing a row and a column, then an item. Item by item would be each individual item on. So if we go back here, item by item is I have to hit my switch for 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 until I get to the number that I want. Group item would be, let's say, the frequency of use one where I have my letters. The left-hand side of the group, the chart would be one group. The right-hand side would be another group. So I could scan the larger groups, and then I'm going to switch over to row column in order to get what I want. Okay, and that's same as having and quartering. It does that whole, that's just halves versus quarters. So same exact concept. And then we move into row column. And then we have coded. So like our Morse code is another one that we can use. And we'll talk a little bit more about Morse code when we get to actually computer access. Okay. So we talked about the Compass software actually, I think a couple weeks ago, but this is a great access assessment software. It's used to measure an individual's skills for computer access, but also for switch access, so switch scanning and switch access. It uses 8 skill tests in 3 input device areas. So you can do pointing, text entry, and switch use. So it doesn't have to be just for computer, it can be for AAC and determining what type of access works best for the individual. You can diagnose difficulties with an existing interface. You can choose the best alternative mouse or alternative keyboard, evaluate performance with different access systems, such as a switch use versus some other type of input. You can plan training interventions by running this assessment. You can track changes in a client's abilities over time, and you can measure the effectiveness of an intervention that you've put into place. So very nice piece of software. All right, so next then we have our selection technique. So that's where that Compass software comes in. It's a good place to use this is to figuring out your selection technique. And whichever technique we choose is going to affect our speed and accuracy. So another consideration with communication is that it needs to be used often, so the technique must be used throughout the day. And what happens if we're doing something over and over throughout the day? We can get fatigued, right? So we want to make sure that whatever access method we're using does not fatigue the person easily when using that technique. And they also need the repeatability from morning to night and day to day. Okay. So these terms, again, we covered the speed and accuracy, the step or manual, automatic, inverse directed. We covered all of those in the access module, but let's go through them real quick. So step is the user controls each movement or step of the scanning indicator through its preset patterns by hitting a switch. Okay. So to select an item, the AAC user hits a second switch once the indicator reaches his desired item. And because of the constant switch activation, this method might be too fatiguing for certain individuals. So thinking about like ALS, right? Might be fatiguing, but that step or manual is easier cognitively to understand. Automatic or auto it's an indicator. The indicator scans in the preset pattern on its own, and item selection occurs when the scanner, when the person hits a switch. Then you've got inverse and directed, so same concept. The indicator will only scan in the preset pattern when the user holds down a switch. So it's opposite of automatic, where automatically starts and keeps going until you hit a switch to stop it and interrupt it to make your selection. Whereas inverse or directed, I have to hold down the switch and then release it when I get to the item I want to select. So next is our processor. Processors are important, right? Because these are our, the computers, it's the electronic component, and it's something that we need to think about and look at because it can be one of the primary features for the rate enhancement, okay, and expansion of available vocabulary. And these features are used to amplify the human technology interface. So one of the things with the processor is encoding techniques. Okay. So the first one is arbitrary coding, which is also called numeric, which includes numeric codes. So we're using codes that do not necessarily have any relationship to the message or the vocabulary item. So an example is that numeric codes are using a letter of the keyboard to stand for a message. It's difficult for a user to remember a lot of these types of codes when they provide no clue as to what the code stands for. So when we get to computer access, it's the same thing where we're looking at like abbreviation expansion and all of these different types of coding that are available out there. Abbreviation expansion is when we're using a couple of different letter combinations to expand that message. So HH, hello, how are you? So I'm only having to type HH and not the entire message. But again, it's difficult to remember a lot of these codes and use them as part of a conversation. And the user is going to be limited in the amount of vocabulary that can be recalled with abbreviations or with the arbitrary coding. Using techniques such as semantic encoding, which is used in MinSpeak, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. The symbols are used as a code, and they have different attributes that help the user find and remember the code as a message. And many more messages can be retrieved at a faster rate by the user during conversation using this type of encoding technique. Okay, so here is MinSpeak. So the symbols or the multi-meaning icons are sequenced to recall messages or vocabulary. It was originally introduced as an encoding technique actually in the early 80s, believe it or not. So the user has a smaller number of icons with multiple meanings, which reduces the access requirements and minimizes keystrokes, right, that are required to retrieve the vocabulary. So for example, to retrieve food, the user would select the apple and then a food group and then a food. To talk about food, the user might select the apple first and then the sun to talk about breakfast, or a skeleton to say that something tastes awful. Okay. By using a word in combination with a part of speech, the user has a huge vocabulary available to them. So for example, if they select the icon for juice and then click on the adjective icon, it means thirsty. But if they select juice and then the verb icon, it means drink. Okay. So, and then going back to that apple example we used earlier to talk about food, when the apple is used in combination with other icons, it can mean fruit, red, eat, bite, or hungry, depending on the part of speech that you combine it with. So it's a pretty cool system. Typically, the icon sequences are short, only 2 to 3 icons to create different words. So if we take a bed icon, we can make it a noun, verb, or adjective. So bed plus noun equals furniture, bed plus verb equals sleep, and bed plus adjective equals tired. Okay. And the icons are fixed on the device, so the user has consistency of icon location, and they need to learn the patterns of combining the icons to create their messages. Words strategy was an earlier MinSpeak application program. Unity is the newer language system that has also led to the foundation of the LAMP words for life and core scanner language systems that a lot of people are using nowadays. With the processor, we also have other rate enhancement techniques such as prediction, which is used for both rate enhancement and vocabulary expansion. So when the person starts typing a list of vocabulary items, that could a list of words pops up that could be potentially used. You guys use this all the time nowadays, right? And word prediction was actually originally developed back in the 70s, but now everybody, and only for like switch scanning, and now everybody uses it. So we use it on our phones when we're texting, right? That's word prediction, where I start typing my message and words are popping up above my keyboard. That's word prediction. So it's helping me type faster. Word completion is when the beginning of a word is typed and the list of choices start with the typed letter or letters. So it's not predicting what it thinks I'm trying to say. It's only listing words that start with that letter. So if you look at the bottom example, an L was typed, so then all of the letters in that are L's, and then the next letter I type, the list is going to change. So if I type LI, anything that doesn't start with LI is going to disappear, and more words that start with LI are going to come in for me to choose. Icon prediction is used with the symbol encoding, right? With the most likely words being represented by the symbol or icon. This is used both in sequencing symbols, so as in MinSpeak, and in using a combination of typing letters and selecting symbols or icons to represent a word. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do the word prediction. In completion, you can also do it with the icon prediction. So in this example, predicted words are represented by the icons, right? So in the fourth row from the bottom, you can see the message window has none, and you can see, like fourth one from the bottom, we have the woman, and then when we select the woman, anything that does not pertain to that message, as you notice on the right, disappears. So in this case, it's icon prediction, so that, okay, I chose the woman. Now anything that I can't combine with that icon to make a message disappears, and only the words that I can create are now still available to me. What you see is the message window has not only the words that were selected, but also the icons or symbols to reinforce literacy for non-readers. And this is a MinSpeak-based system, so only the icons that follow the previously selected icon or symbol have a light or are still available for selection. So again, icon prediction, same concept, just with icons. We also need to look at organizing vocabulary as an effect on rate enhancement. So using conversation-based strategies should be considered. So looking at interactive categories. So in the earlier slide, we presented, we talked about initiation, greetings, and requests, and information exchange, commenting, conversational repair. Those are all important, right? In semantic categories, dictionaries, menus, using the dictionaries or menus organized by letter of the alphabet or category are going to also help increase our rate and expand our vocabulary. Other things to think about is the mood or context. So organizing by topic or environment or communication partners, and then also scripts. So since storytelling is a primary mode of communication, we all relay information by telling stories about ourselves, maybe our families, or things that we've done or things that have happened. And we use the same stories over and over again. And hopefully not to the same person. When your parents get older, you've heard the story 50 million times, right? But scripts are used to capture those stories so that they can be relayed to others. And scripts can also be used, so if you have a student using AAC and they need to do, a verbal presentation in school, you can create that script ahead of time so that it will they'll automatically be able to tell their story in class. Okay. We also need to look at the levels and how we expand our vocabulary using levels. Okay. We also need to look at themes, right, that can be used to expand the vocabulary. So levels have typically been used to change the vocabulary available from, a keyboard, when a level is changed, an overlay, like a communication overlay with pictures with corresponding vocabulary, needs to be changed as well. Themes, and we'll show some examples here, but themes were thinking about MinSpeak again, right? This was the concept of themes was introduced with MinSpeak, where the same icons were used on the display, but depending on the theme, the icons would have a different meaning. So when we talked about kind of like that parts of speech with the icon, both levels and themes were used, have been used with static displays, and the keyboard or the layout did not change. Okay. But they're also being used with dynamic displays where the display changes when a level or a theme is selected, eliminating the need to physically change the overlay, or with themes, the dynamic display highlights the attribute associated with the first symbol selected. So here are two examples, and these are older examples, but they are graphically, they do a very nice job showing you those levels. Okay, so this is static display levels, and it shows the overlays being changed. Okay, levels are selected by turning, or opening the device or sliding it out of a device and having to put a new overlay in. So anytime you need to change the communication, so let's say one overlay is for food, one overlay is for greetings, right? If I need to move between those two, I have to manually change the overlay and change the level in order to communicate with my whole other overlay of symbols. The Quick Talker by AbleNet and the Go Talk by Attainment Company are also examples of static displays with the manual levels where the picture sheets, right, are needing to be switched out. So thinking about those, the user isn't always going to be able to independently access that type of device. So Michael, you're asking how is that done? Are you talking about the levels? How is that done? So after you change the pictures, there's going to be a button on the device that allows you to change the level. So let's say the device has 4 levels. There's going to be a button that allows you to switch between level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I switch out level 1 pictures to level 2 pictures, and I use my switch then, or my button on the device to change to that other level that matches my overlay. Does that answer your question? Correct, correct. There's different level modes, right? Yep, you can switch between them by just pushing a little button on the device. And some of them have like a little indicator, like a little switch, like a switch. I'm trying to think of switch for, think about like a light switch, right? Where you can switch between on and off. It would be the same kind of concept where you can switch between the different levels. And then here's examples of dynamic displays with symbols. So topics can be selected to change the choice of symbols. So thinking about even like AAC apps today that are available today, such as Touch Chat or Cough Drop or Tippy Talk, right? When you select, let's say, food, the display is going to change automatically to all new pictures of all food. If I select one, let's say called sports, my page is going to change. So now the page is now all sports, okay? So it's going to, the pages, they're dynamic, so the pages automatically change for me, so I don't have to manually move anything around. So thinking about like your smartphone, when I select an icon or I select a folder that I've set up on my phone, it automatically changes the display to show me, what I now have available to me. Same exact concept. Another example of a dynamic display, so in this case, an area of the keyboard, the selection area has been enlarged for the user. So larger targets can be used for either visual or physical reasons. And keeping in mind for all of these AAC devices, we can also use key guards, which is really nice. So key guards are available for our dynamic systems, which is really nice. And we'll talk about key guards in a little more detail when we get to computer access. So in order to have access to a larger vocabulary, when using the vocabulary expansion features, the size of the vocabulary needs to be considered, as well as whether additional vocabulary, such as user-defined or pre-programmed, can be added. Many devices are provided with the pre-stored vocabulary that can be organized to meet the user's needs. But we also want to add additional messages. And application packages are typically sets of vocabulary that are designed to be used with specific populations or in specific environments. So that's a great way to get started. But do we have the capability to add our own programmed messages into the system? So that's another thing to think about. Providing the option for the client to edit selections can be essential, is an essential feature. Being able to delete characters or symbols, being able to insert, or being able to check spelling or grammar may all be features that they need, and they may be needed to relaying accurate or intended messages. So just thinking about that customization, or that in being able to individualize a device is really crucial. So let's talk about output characteristics now. So these include visual displays, auditory output, and coded output. This coded output is for when you're communicating using an AAC device to communicate to a computer, or maybe to another device, such as environmental control. So it may be important to consider that the communication partner's needs, right, and abilities too. So if one of the user's communication partners is hearing impaired, one type of auditory output may be better than another, or visual output may be needed. And partners who are non-reading may require auditory output. So the output is important. And then we have devices that have coded output, which is available with many of our devices nowadays, especially our dynamic systems. They can be used as a remote control to activate other devices or appliances, and they can become an environmental control to activate TVs, lights, radios, all kinds of things in your environment. Let's see the question. Why would you choose this type of technology over mainstream with apps, which are more readily available to consumers? What type of technology are you referring to as opposed to the apps? Because apps are just kind of taking over. What's prioritary? Not sure what prioritary is. So AAC apps, there we go. Insurance will cover devices, but usually not iPads. So if you're going through insurance, yeah, devices are definitely key. Apps most of them are so inexpensive, they are pretty much taking over AAC, but there's still a place for the more sophisticated devices. So thinking about like eye gaze, if the user needs eye gaze, for example, right now we can't easily do that with an iPad, or as easily as a device that has it built in. We can do it, it's just not as easy, and it's going to be potentially a little bit more expensive. Okay, so it all just depends on the person's needs and their funding source. Packaging of AAC devices has always been a major consideration as well. For someone that is ambulatory, the device needs to be small enough to carry so that they can communicate anywhere they go. And some people want the versatility of a computer system where the software to run the AAC system is only one of the applications available. So a lot of these devices nowadays have the ability for you to do other things, so such as email or playing videos, listening to music, all different kinds of things that you can do. Surf the web. Okay. And that takes us to the dedicated versus computer-based systems. All right, so the question is, isn't there an app that uses eye gaze? Like you look at the phone screen and is, and that's still evolving though. There are a couple of companies that are working to use the integrated cameras and webcams in laptops and tablets in order to use eye gaze. There is one currently that's out there that uses, yeah, I think for the phone, but in regards for using eye gaze for somebody with a disability, those are technically um, not going to be as useful, but it's definitely something to start looking at because they are evolving quickly. Okay, so dedicated versus computer-based systems. So some people prefer dedicated systems, and which are typically designed just for AAC. So in dedicated systems, considerations have been made for sufficient battery life, durability, and the primary use being communication, so that other applications do not confuse the issue, right? Some having too much for some people will just confuse them. It can be advantageous in situations where family members, and this, I'm sure some of you have encountered this, may be tempted to, let's say if it's a laptop-based system, to take that and use it as a laptop and take it away as their communication device. And think, well, they need to use the, because, hey, I needed to use the computer, so I'm going to take your AAC device away from you so I can use the computer, and when I'm done, I'm going to give it back. And it really does happen, and it has happened, unfortunately. So using a dedicated system fixes that issue, but it also, they also include other assistive technology applications, such as in our EIDL, so our electronic aids for daily living. When a laptop system is used, the durability of the laptop and the battery life are going to be an issue. There are often problems with the case falling apart. Excuse me. The hard drive can crash. The device can take too long to get into the communication program. Obviously, the battery life, again, too short if to be used all day for communication. They're also more difficult to mount. Computers are also easier or more appealing for somebody to steal. Several companies have repackaged laptop computer systems into hybrid systems to address all of these issues. And these systems can be used for other applications besides AAC. Okay. Packaging also addresses how the system is integrated with other assistive technology devices. How the AC device is to be transported or carried around on a wheelchair, how it might be used as the keyboard for a computer, how it might be used to operate electronic aids for daily living, and whether or not the controls for the AAC device should be integrated with any other devices. So let's talk real quick about mounting. So this is an example of side folding wheelchair mounting bracket. With the device folded to the side, the user can transfer in and out of the wheelchair without the device having to be removed from the chair, because typically before you transfer in and out, you want to remove the device, but this type of mounting allows the person to be transferred in and out. It can also be used to move the device out of the way to use other devices such as a computer. It's important that users who are independent in wheeled mobility are able to remember the devices stored to the side so they do not try to go through a doorway with the device in that position. This is a rear folding bracket, and it's for users that need to have the device out of the way while they're driving their wheelchair. So here we see brackets used to attach the wheelchair mounting brackets. They are made to fit on different tubing sizes and shapes, and you'll want to work with the manufacturer of the wheelchair to make sure you're getting the right mounting system. Also be careful where you mount onto the wheelchair frame. So ideally you want to mount to the frame itself, not to removable parts such as armrests or leg rest hangers, right? Because they move and it will not be as stable. And be careful with tilt and space wheelchairs. You don't want the user's legs to hit the mounting bar when they're tilted back or have the bar prevent them from tilting back. You also want the device to be mounted in a stable and safe configuration regardless of how much the chair is tilted. And the other thing with tilting is if the chair is being tilted, we need to have it tilted or mounted above the tilt. And we'll talk about that here again in a minute. So this attachment is used for the actual AAC device. So as part of the mount, you have this component that attaches, and each of the AAC devices are designed to be easily released so that the device can be taken off the wheelchair and used on other surfaces, such as a desk or a table. Okay, so it's an easy, quick release. All right, so a couple of last things for mounting, and we are almost done here. We'll talk about some mouse and keyboard emulation, and then we will be moving on to our test. So first thing, avoid mounting, which I already mentioned, but avoid mounting it to movable components on the wheelchair. So no swing away footrest hangers, no removable armrests. And if the wheelchair has the tilt capability, right, I mentioned make sure to place the frame clamp above the tilt mechanism so the device follows the person when they change positions. This will ensure that the device stays within the user's eye line. Also consider a locking frame clamp if the tilt is present. Okay. And lastly, we have, is it last? Oh, no, two more things. Is keyboard and mouse emulation. You can actually use some of these AAC devices to operate and control a computer by using this keyboard and mouse emulation. So in IntelliTalk Toolbar, it's an older example, but it's a good example to look at because it shows the different options to operate a computer with icons. So there's things where you can have, text to speech, you can do editing, you can do saving, you can do different, you can delete words or characters, do spell check just by scanning through or direct selection of these different items. You can do the middle picture there shows where you can move to a mouse emulation, and just by using the different arrows, left, right, up, down, to move a mouse around. Okay. And then a lot of systems also have some nice integrated features, such as being able to access email and the internet, as well as our electronic aids for daily living to control appliances in your home, even in your classroom or in your work environment. Okay, so we are going to, are there any questions before we go to the test? And it looks like Michael put up here some new tech that he saw for quadriplegics. So if you guys want to take a look at that. Okay, so any questions before I launch the test? Okay, here we go. I'm going to launch the test for you guys now. Can everybody see the test? Perfect. Okay, for you guys who can't see the test, do me a favor and either email me or you can put it in chat there. What operating your system you're using, so Windows, Mac, and what browser you're using, and then let me know if you have been able to use or see the tests previously, because we're trying to figure out um, why some people are not able to see the test. Okay. Okay, so we have one with Mac and Chrome and being able to see the test previously. And the others who have not are able to see the test, let me know what computer system and browser you're using. Okay. All right, we're about 79%, so I think we'll go ahead and close out the test. Okay, can everybody see the results here?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and at least I think you couldn't see the actual test. But yeah, anybody who can't see the test, go ahead and give me that information about this Windows or Mac and the browser that you're using. Okay, so the first one here, we got 79% answered it correctly. So which of the following is not a functional or augmentative alternative communication? So we had that's actually pretty good. The function of AAC is not to control devices within the environment. They can use their devices to control devices in their environment, but that's not the primary function. The primary function is to participate in conversations, be able to communicate in written communication, as well as be able to demonstrate communicative competence. And then we just talked about this one. When mounting a speech generating device to a wheelchair with tilt in space, where should the frame clamp be placed? It should be placed above the tilt so that the device follows the person as they're being tilted. Okay. So any questions? Let's see here. Can you give me an example of controlling a device within an environment? Okay, so there are certain augmentative communication devices such as a Dynavox that has environmental control built into it. And we're going to talk about environmental or electronic aids for daily living next week on Tuesday. But through icons on their device, they can go into their specific page for EADLs, and they can choose, for example, a light, and they can turn a light on in their room. They can use their device as a TV remote, change the channel, turn the volume up and down. So those are the types of things they can do with a device. Let's see here. And then, so during speech training, is that when one is taught that compass is best for 92-year-old, 30-year-old, 15-year-olds? It's basically, how do AC professionals know what to use for who with an endless number of alternatives, or is this totally left up to the patient? You're basically, in order to figure out what device is best for the patient, you're going to look at their needs, you're going to look at their skills and their abilities, you're going to look at their cognitive abilities, and you're going to look at their preferences. Okay, so yeah, it can be pretty daunting task to figure out what type of device they should be using, like static versus dynamic, low tech versus high tech, and if it is high tech, which high tech. Um, but they're going to be working specifically with an AAC specialist, so a speech therapist who is an expert in AAC, to know what that person can do. And they're going to do different assessments to look at their expressive and receptive and their cognitive levels and all of that in order to determine what type of device. Okay, yeah. So if we read that question again, you're saying that you thought it was worded funny. If you look at how it was worded, which of the following is not a function of AAC? Control of devices within the environment. Yes, you can control devices within the environment with an AAC device, but that is not the main function. The main function is communication, and all the other three options were communication. Yeah, William, trial and error, that is correct. Lots of trial and error in assistive technology. All right, so let's take a break, and then we'll get into computer access. So quick break so we can get moving, because computer access is a little long. We want to try and get that done today. So let's just take like a quick 5-minute break and be back about 8:40. Okay, hope everybody's back. We're going to go ahead and get started with computer access technology. We're going to be looking at identifying the technologies for adapting standard input and output devices, alternatives to using standard devices, performance enhancers for computer access, um, alternatives to a standard mouse, um, performance enhancers, and alternative output as well. Okay. So when we think of computers, we need to think about the different processes that are involved. So the processor, right? The CPU, the memory, the storage devices, and then the input and output devices. So those are all important. Identifying the hard disk sizes, the amount of RAM that's involved. It all just depends on what programs you're using and what devices you're using, and looking at the requirements for those different programs. So a lot of different operating systems out there. Typically, we're using Windows and Mac OS systems. We also have Linux and Unix. And then with all of our tablets and phones, we have Androids and the iOS systems. So a lot of different systems and a lot of different features that are available out there. And then we have lots of different applications, so lots of different word processing and databases and spreadsheets and graphic programs. So a lot of different hardware and software choices that we need to be kind of looking at as we go. And then we also have all of our communication applications. So, the internet, all the different web browsers we have, email systems, all the social networking sites that are available out there, games, games are important for some of our computer users, instructional programs that are out there, as well as, you also have all the cloud-based technology. So a lot of different applications that we also need to be looking at. All right, so we're going to look at a lot of these different computer access strategies individually here. So the first is workstation positioning and ergonomics. Okay, so here you see two examples of workstations. So the one on the left has two height adjustment surfaces and a mount for the monitor. And then the workstation on the right has a monitor on a Lazy Susan so that it can be rotated, so you can move positions, or maybe it can be rotated so a different user could also use it. And in this case, you can have one user using a standard keyboard and another user using an expanded keyboard. So a lot of different things that you can do. So lots of ergonomics, right? And these simulations show how we should be using a system, but let's talk quickly about proper ergonomics for using a standard keyboard, okay? A keyboard should be set into a neutral position so that the wrists are in a relaxed and straight position. The forearms, arms, and shoulders should also be in a neutral position. There should be no reaching going on. So the keyboard should be positioned so that you're not having to reach at all, because this will pull your upper arms and shoulders forward and it'll pull them out of that neutral position. And then the proper height is important. So it should be positioned around elbow level when your arms hang naturally at your sides, which is a lot lower than what we all use the keyboard at. But those are the three things we need to think about: the neutral position, no reaching, and the proper height. In both Windows and Mac operating systems, there are several adaptations available. What we see here are just screenshots from the ease of access settings in the control panel for Windows 10. But then we also see the universal access for the Apple OS 10. And what we don't have pictures here is Google. Google also has incorporated a lot of accessibility features, but today we're just going to concentrate on Windows and Apple options. So a couple of different adjustment that we can make that are built in. So this would be for our keyboards, okay? First one is sticky keys, which is a latching. We're not going to be doing Google today at all, but we can, if we have time at the end, we can talk a little bit about Google, but it's not in the slides, Aldrich. So if we have time, we can talk about it briefly. But sticky keys allows thinking about like a one-handed typist, right? How is a one-handed typist going to do certain key combinations? So think about Control Delete, right? So that's 3 keys, and how are you going to use one hand to hit all 3 of those? Sticky keys will latch down modifier keys. So Shift, Control, Alt, okay, it will hold those in place so that you can hit 2 or more keys at the same time to do those different key combinations. Filter keys is really cool because it'll actually, and bounce keys is the other, is the Mac version, where it ignores the brief or repeated pressing of a key. So have you ever sat in front of your computer and you are thinking about something, and then you look down and realize that you had your finger on one of the keys and it just kept going and it was typing over and over and over and over again on your on your word processing program? The filter keys or bounce keys will actually stop that, and only after a designated amount of time that you have set will it start repeating that key, so repeating that letter that you have pressed down. Repeat keys is another version that adjusts that auto repeat. So the automatic repeating speed can be slowed down, or the repeat feature can be eliminated entirely. You've got slow keys, which is a delayed acceptance. So the acceptance time can be extended so that the key has to be held down for a set amount of time before the character is selected. You've got toggle keys, and this adds tones or sounds when locking keys are selected. And then you've got alternative keyboard layouts. And we're going to talk about those here next. So most keyboards or computers have, keyboards have what layout? The QWERTY layout. And does anybody know, one, why it's called QWERTY and why it was originally developed? Any guesses? Anybody out there know? Yes, to stop. So thinking about what was, so I'm going to address the stop keys from jamming first. That is correct. So thinking about a standard old-fashioned typewriter, okay? The hammers on the typewriter were getting jammed when the typists were typing, the faster they got with typing. So what they did is they rearranged the layout of the typing or the keyboard to be this QWERTY keyboard layout, so it prevented those letter arms from jamming. So it was designed for that, and it was not designed for speed. So it is not. It's not designed for speed at all. It was designed specifically for old-fashioned typewriters, and we still use them today. There's other keyboard layouts as well, and you don't have to go figuring them out because they're built in to most of the systems, and we're going to talk about some of those here. Okay, so in Windows, for example, you can change the keyboard layout and under settings. So if you go into settings and then go to time and language, you can click on the language and then the current language that you have set up. And then there's a button that pops up called options. You then have the ability to add a keyboard and select a different layout such as Dvorak. So Dvorak was actually named after a man who's the man who developed it, and it was optimized for 10-finger typing. It uses the most frequently used letters on the home row, and the next most frequently used are right above the home row because it's actually easier for your fingers to move up than they are to move down. And if you use it, you'll see that your hands really do move much less when using move less with the Dvorak as opposed to a QWERTY keyboard layout. Dvorak was designed for speed, but he also designed layouts that were optimized for one-handed typists, and he has a left hand and he's got a right hand. And if you'll notice on, let's say if we look at the right hand configuration there, you see D, T, H, E, and A keys in that home row. The next most frequently used keys then are within easy reach of the index and middle fingers. So it's a real quick one-handed typing layout. Dvorak is a great layout, but what you're going to find is that most people who are already using the QWERTY keyboard are going to be reluctant to change to a Dvorak. It does require new learning, and it slows them down initially when they already have, so much time invested in learning the old layout. But once they've practiced and used it, what they're going to find out is that it's actually a lot quicker. Yeah, George, it is yet very, very difficult to get people to, especially younger students, to change to a different layout. All of these layouts come, or the Dvoraks come standard with Windows. And for Macs, they're an add-on, but it's free and you can just download them and add them onto your Mac. The Chuban is another layout that is used for one finger, right? So if you have a one-finger typist, or they're using a pointer, such as a mouse stick or a head stick, this one is set up for the most frequently used letters to be right in the middle of the keyboard. So that's a pretty cool one. Medenta actually has on-screen keyboards that use a file that will also remap the physical keyboard, and then they can have a Chuban keyboard as one of their options. Okay. So think about keyboards. So physical keyboards, you can purchase an alternate layout, or you can just redo it yourself. I mean, I have previously, when we were working with actually a computer programmer, we popped out all of the keys on her keyboard and we configured them to her own personalized keyboard layout based on her most frequently used keys for programming. And what we did is we used a utility that allows us to rearrange the keyboard. So a couple programs that you can use for remapping, Keymapper, there's a Microsoft Keyboard Layout Creator, there's Map Keyboard, Sharp Keys, and Key Tweak. Another thing you can do, instead of popping, keys out, so if it's like a laptop, you can't pop the keys out, right? But you can put stickers on a keyboard. So, and you can buy stickers at a lot of different computer stores or online, and then you can just put the stickers over top of how you've remapped. William, I don't know of any specific keyboards that are for two-fingered typists, but the first one that I would look at would be the one, like the Chuban, the one-fingered typing keyboards. Okay. I say we can also adapt standard keyboards to make them easier to use. So a key guard, for example, is going to help us target. It also helps support the hand, especially if we have fine motor issues. Disadvantages to a key guard: it can actually decrease typing speed, but you can try the operating system adjustments that we talked about first, like the slow keys or the bounce keys, before moving to a key guard. Wrist supports are great that help provide stability, and they can improve endurance. Mobile arm supports can help reduce fatigue by supporting the arms. Wrist supports can help to keep hands correctly positioned and provide additional support. Okay. Here we have keyboard extenders, right? So for users who aren't able to use their fingers or hands to access the keys, but have the range of motion or gross motor control needed to type. So control extenders can be mouse sticks. So like on the picture on the left, is using it with a tablet, but you can also use them with a mini keyboard. So mini keyboards are just smaller, more compact, so you don't have as much movement in order to type. And on the right is a hand pointer, and it's just made of, it's just a plastic cuff and dowel, so it just slips right onto the fingers. There's also typing aids where it's a cuff that slips onto the hand. So a lot of different ways that you can use different control extenders. So here's some other keyboard alternative options, and we're going to talk about all of these individually. Okay, so the first is alternative keyboards. So lots and lots of different alternative keyboards out there. A couple examples here. So, in the top right, we have the split intent keyboard. This is an ergonomic keyboard, and it's great for positioning to help with carpal tunnel, wrist, fatigue. Bottom left, we have a corded keyboard. It's called a BAT keyboard. That specific one's the BAT keyboard. It's for one-handed typists, and it requires you to do key combinations in order to type. So thinking about, when you play a piano, you do key combinations to play chords. So that's why it's called a corded keyboard, where you do key combinations with the fingers and the thumb to do all of your typing. So they're pretty cool. On the bottom right, we actually have what's called a half QWERTY keyboard. And this is also for one-handed typing. And when the user needs the other half of the keyboard, they actually hold down the space bar, and then there's a mirror image key so that you can access the other half of the keyboard. We also then have various expanded and mini keyboard options available. Expanded keyboards provide larger key sizes, but require a larger overall range of motion, whereas mini keyboards minimize the range of motion required by minimizing individual key size, but the user will need good fine motor control in order to access them. Speech recognition. There's two types of speech recognition, but we only use the one anymore. There's discrete and continuous speech recognition. Discrete was the original type of speech recognition, and you had to talk like this. You could not talk normally. You had to pause in between your words. Now we have continuous speech recognition, and the software is going to pick up my normal speech rate. So I don't have to pause. I can just keep talking and talking and talking. So a couple things to remember about speech input. So just like everything else we've discussed so far, is that it is a direct selection technique. So, the keyboards and the pointers and all that stuff so far, they're all direct selection. It does require consistent speech. If the person can say the same thing the same way, most of the time it's worth looking at speech input. If you can't, it's not necessarily going to be the best input method for you. Individuals with spinal cord injuries tend to like speech recognition because you can also do a lot of keyboard commands and navigation with just voice. It does require some visual monitoring. However, with a noise canceling microphone and the new programs that we have available with all the improved accuracy, you can correct your text after you enter it rather than as you're entering it, because a lot of them don't require as much training as others do. Some people find it just does not work well in the noisier environment. So thinking about like a classroom setting or a noisy office setting. But if you try it with a noise canceling microphone, you may just get the results that you want. Um, it can be cognitively demanding, depending on the program that you select to use, because some need to be trained extensively and they need to be trained right. And it needs to be consistent training. And if you can't do that, you're just going to have a frustrated client. If the system is not corrected, it will just keep getting worse and worse instead of getting better and better and improving on that accuracy. What's really nice thing about voice input is that it is fast, and the only physical requirement is good use of your voice. And a lot of the newer systems do not require training, which is really nice. Another keyboard alternative is using on-screen keyboards with devices that facilitate mouse emulation, such as a mouth-controlled joystick or maybe eye gaze. The keyboard, what's nice is that the keyboards can be positioned at the bottom half of the screen or maybe even at the top of the screen with the application at on the other half of the screen. And for this particular on-screen keyboard, it's being used to make selections on a browser, and the user of the keyboard just scans the choices, can scan the choices with a single switch. They can go up, they can go down, they can click, they can right click. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with on-screen keyboards and switch access. So you can do direct selection, you can use eye gaze, you can use switches. So it's really cool. Best voice to text software. It depends on what your needs are. I would say the king of all voice recognitions would be Dragon Naturally Speaking. But that is one that needs a lot of training and consistency in order to get a really good accuracy. Microsoft, however, has a built-in dictation feature that is really nice. Google Docs has built-in voice typing, which is a really good program as well. And Mac also has a built-in speech program. They're all pretty decent voice input speech recognition systems nowadays. So yeah, it really depends on what your needs are. Okay. My favorite, I don't know if I really have a favorite because it just depends on the system that the users are using already. So for example, in schools, they're using Google Drive, Google Docs all the time. So the first one we're gonna try is, the Google voice typing. A lot of times they're also using text help read and write. And that has voice dictation built into it. So a lot of these reading and writing support programs have voice dictation built into them. So I really like the text helps read and write. But actually the Windows-based, the Microsoft one is really, really good as well. Again, no training. So basically my favorite programs are the ones where we don't need to train them anymore. Okay. Morse code is another input method that can be used with people with physical disabilities. They can use sip and puffs. They can use 1, 2, or 3 switches, and there's other input devices as well that they can use. In addition to letters, numbers, and symbols, they can use Morse code for commands, so computer commands. It's also a really good idea to incorporate abbreviation expansion, word prediction, and macros to increase speed, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. Next is our mice, right? So our adaptations to our standard mouse. Users need to be able to point, they need to be able to click, double click, drag, right? And the mouse can be quickly adapted by adjusting the features of the mouse from the control panel. So for example, buttons can be redefined, so you can actually switch like left and right, clicking. Tracking speed can be adjusted. The presence of the mouse trail, kind of like I call it the mouse tail, right? Behind the pointer can be added, and the look of the pointer can be changed. And from the accessibility options, the number pad can actually be converted to perform mouse functions. So if you ever noticed your number pad on your keyboard has arrows on there, that's for the function mouse keys. It allows you to use your number pad to operate your mouse. And almost all programs have keyboard equivalents that can reduce the use of the mouse. So for example, you can use, the command key plus P to print. How long does it take to teach Sip and Puff to kids with Morse code? Yeah, good question. There is a learning curve with Morse code. It all just depends on their cognitive ability and their physical ability with using that Sip and Puff. Because once they know all of the different letters, in all the different commands, they're going to be pretty quick, because Sip and Puff can be a very, very quick access method. It's if you're just doing straight Sip and Puff, pretty quick. If you're using Sip and Puff with like switch, like scanning, it's still going to be slow. So it really depends on the use. I would say Morse code is not used as much as it used to be. And it's exactly right, Michael, because of all the other technology options that we have out there. We're not seeing Morse code used as often as we used to, but it's still a viable option. We used to use it a lot at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center actually on the spinal cord injury floor with quadriplegics. We used to do a lot of Sip and Puff with Morse code with them. Okay. All right, so next we have some additional alternatives. Trackballs. You can use a joystick as a mouse, touchpad. So like on your laptop, you have a touchpad. Touch screens are awesome as an alternative to a mouse. A head mouse, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Eye gaze obviously is another one, and then scanning, Morse code, and voice. Okay, we just talked about Morse code and we talked about voice. So a head mouse. A head mouse uses a camera to translate head movements into cursor movements. Some of them you need a little silver reflective dot, like right between your eyes, to pick up the head movements. There's a newer head mouse out there. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Glass House. So like glass and mouse, but Glass House. And it uses Bluetooth to actually move the mouse. So you don't have to be directly in front of the computer's camera to use it, because that's another thing. You need to be right in front of that camera for it to pick up your head movements. So it's pretty cool, the Bluetooth. I can actually be on the side of the computer and still activate it with the Bluetooth. With with the head mouse, you still need some type of switch or a Sip and Puff or even a dwell feature to activate mouse clicks. Yes, voice recognition is synonymous with speech recognition. They are exactly the same. And then voice typing is another term that's being used as well. Okay. Okay. So then eye gaze. Okay. So this is a direct selection technique because I'm directly selecting with my eyes. It uses the camera. It uses a camera to follow your pupils of your eyes. They tend to be more expensive, but in recent years, with the newer technology, we've seen a huge decrease in the price. They usually require the user to keep their head in one position and only move their eyes. Okay. But with eye movement, it can be one of the last things to be lost in some progressive diseases, such as like ALS. So for some clients, it might be the best option. So characteristics of eye gaze, obviously direct selection. It's easy to understand. It's a very direct system. It's very transparent. It does require, however, stable positioning. And keep in mind that if the user wears glasses, some of the systems have trouble when there's a glare coming from the glasses to see the proper, the movement of the pupils. All right, so next is switches. And we talked about switches when we talked about access, but they can be used to access computer icons, to navigate through the computer, and to activate mouse clicks. They do require a switch interface to the computer, or a switch adapted trackball or mouse or joystick. And there are newer switches that use Bluetooth as the switch interface connection. So those are pretty cool. A single switch user can use a different variety of programs, right, that can scan the display on your computer and use different programs to activate mouse clicks. Okay, so the picture on the bottom there, that's point and click. It's actually a free program, and it uses a small box on the screen so that you can select the different mouse functions. The picture on the left is cross scanner, and this uses a line that moves down the screen. And then once that line intersects with what you want to be selecting, so think about all the icons, like the different program icons on your desktop. Once that line hits one of those icons that you want, you press your switch to stop the line from moving down anymore. And what happens now, it converts to a pointer, like a mouse pointer, and that moves across the line until you get to your specific icon that you want to select. Or if you're thinking about if you're using this on an on-screen keyboard, right? And then you hit your switch again to make your selection. So think about, the row column scanning that we talked about, same exact concept, but it's using a line. And then the picture on the right is a dwell mouse clicker program, and the user just needs to dwell their mouse pointer, or if they're using eye gaze, dwell their gaze over the command that they need. Okay. Lots of different typing injuries. So this is just a great resource for both keyboard and mouse alternatives when we have a typing injury. So it's a nice FAQ website. So if you want to grab that real quick and write it down, it's just a nice little website that you can take a look at. Okay, so next we have performance enhancement. So besides the actual method of making the selections, there are some other things that can be done to make computer access faster and easier. And you can incorporate things like word prediction or word completion, abbreviation expansion, and macros. So we talked about word prediction and completion when we talked about AAC, right? So word prediction, it looks to predict the next word that you want to use, whereas completion is just a list of words displayed based on the letters you're typing. And there's no prediction component to it. Word prediction programs learn your most frequently used words and will look at the words already used to predict that next possible word. It does require that you are able to look at the word list. So there's that visual component. You have to be looking down, up and down, right, between your keyboard and the screen. So that can actually slow you down if you're a fast typer. The advantage of word prediction is, though, that you have fewer keystrokes that you have to make. And if keystrokes are difficult or tiring, or if they're very, or just time consuming in general based on, maybe it's switch scanning that you're using, then word prediction can actually be an advantage, and especially with scanning, right? Can really be helpful in increasing that speed. Another advantage of word prediction is that you do not have to remember how to spell the words. You just have to recognize the words when you see them. So it can actually help with spelling as well, and we've seen it used with students with dyslexia. Abbreviation expansion allows the user to type a few letters and then the program will expand them to a longer word or phrase. One advantage of this is that it decreases the keystrokes you have to make. The other advantage is that you do not have to look at the selections like you do in word prediction. You just type the letters and the word or the phrase automatically appears for you. One disadvantage is that you have to remember all the different abbreviations. So some will be easy, like, ASAP, right? Pretty standard, as soon as possible, right? But the more abbreviations you have, the harder it's going to get to remember all of those. Another disadvantage is that abbreviation expansion is individualized, it's personalized, specific to that user's needs, which means you're going to have to write them down after you've created a list of possible abbreviations based on what you do and how you do it. It can be time consuming to set them up, but it's pretty easy to set up abbreviations for a person's name, their address, or signature block. So like standard things that they're using on a regular basis, those are much easier to set up. This is just a quick example of abbreviation expansion called Short Keys. It's a third-party program. It just makes setting them all up quicker and easier. So again, Short Keys. And then macros. Okay, similar to abbreviation expansion, and they're built into most word processing programs. And just like abbreviation expansion, you have to set them up yourself, and they're going to be individualized. And macros are things that you do with your computer and your mouse, and you can automate them. So let's see, for example, if let's say you do standard documents on a regular basis, or students have standard formatting that they have to use when they write a report or a paper. So let's say the first line needs to be in header font, and it has to be a specific font, and has to be bolded, and has to be centered. You can actually create a macro to automatically do that for you. Okay, so you don't have to, after you're done typing it, you can activate your macro, and it will do the rest for you instead of typing it, going, highlighting it, finding your header font, your fonts and your header settings, and then your bolding, and then your alignment. The macro will just automatically do it for you. So in that case, it's pretty cool. But again, because you're doing a lot of things with the macros, you have to remember them. You have to think about all of the different functions that you do with your mouse and your keyboard before you start setting them up. This is Macro Express. It's just a third-party program. It actually makes programming macros a lot quicker and easier, because like the built-in one for like Microsoft Word, it's actually a little confusing. So if you have somebody who wants to be using them, a third-party program like Macro Express may be a good idea, because it's just so much easier to use. We can also make adjustments to the computer to meet individual abilities. So if we think about somebody with low vision, we need to change like the font size and the color, maybe the background color. So like maybe a blue or black background with white or yellow letters, to have that high contrast to make it easier for somebody to see. A mouse pointer size, so we talked about the mouse adjustments earlier, but the mouse pointer size, we can increase it, we can also change it to like high contrast. There's screen enlargers, there's contrast adjustment, then there's different sounds. So let's go through those real quick. So Windows magnifiers, so screen enlargers, screen magnifiers. These are built in to your operating systems. So right here, this is the Windows magnification in ease of access settings, and it allows us to adjust the zoom as well as how the magnification is displayed. So it can be full screen magnification, it can be lens, so like a computer lens or camera lens, or docked, where only part of the screen shows the magnification and the other half of the screen is the normal font size. You can also use third-party screen magnification programs like a Zoom Text that provides additional low vision supports with a lot more magnification levels available, has more display options, and it also incorporates things like the high contrast and a screen reader. So here's high contrast. Um, and operating systems also have the high contrast built into them. So Windows 10 now actually also has contrast options for color blindness, which is pretty cool. And that's in your ease of access settings. And in Windows 10, the high contrast options are inverted, so that white on black. And you also have grayscale, and then you have an inverted grayscale as well. And then programs like that Zoom Text that I mentioned, the high contrast combinations, you can do black on white, or black and white, you can do black and yellow, you can do blue and yellow, so you have a lot more options color-wise. All right, so that mouse pointer that we talked about, changing that mouse pointer, such an easy thing that we can do is increase the size of that mouse and turn it into high contrast. So instead of a white mouse cursor, it's a black mouse cursor, and it just makes it a lot easier to find. Sounds in the computer give us important information, right? And for a person that is hard of hearing or deaf, they need a different way to get notifications. And so the hearing category in ease of access has an option for visual notifications, where you can have the active caption bar, the active window, or the desktop flash for notification, right? So that flashing screen replaces the auditory beep. So for visually impaired users, as well as individuals with reading difficulties, speech output can be used. So screen readers, you can read everything on the computer screen, from icons to menus to emails, documents, and web pages. There's also keystroke echoing, and this is when each letter or number is, as it's being typed, it's being read aloud to you. And then for low vision, we can and blindness, we can do braille output for the screen. This is done through additional hardware, such as a refreshable braille keyboard, as you see in the bottom right there, excuse me, or a braille printer. Okay, so when we think about text input, the important thing to remember is that if you cannot use the keyboard, there are still a lot of ways to enter text into a computer. You just have to determine your client's skills and their needs and match them to the best input method. So any questions before we launch the test? And I'm surprised I got through that one so quickly. So any questions before? Okay. All right, you guys ready for the test? All righty, here we go. Fingers crossed everybody can see it this time. All right, test is up. I'm going to give you a little bit more time to finish the test. Yeah, Fidelis, yeah, I'm working with actually GoToTraining to try and figure out why some of you cannot see the test. Apparently this is somewhat of a known issue, and I guess it's something with operating systems and browsers and making sure everything's updated is one of the things that they recommend. All right, so it looks like we are at 70%. So we're gonna go ahead and close the test and review it. And then we'll have a couple minutes for questions. Okay. Okay, can everybody see the test results? Teresa, we do not take a test that covers the whole course next week. You will get emailed that test that will cover the whole course. And that's you take that, and then once you've completed that, you get your CEUs. Okay, so first one, a key guard is, and everybody did a really good job on this, is used to provide stability to the hand and promote finger isolation for key activation. A key guard, we are not enlarging anything, and we're not preventing moisture. To prevent moisture, you're going to need a moisture guard, and we're not enlarging keys with a key guard. Okay, so we're providing stability and helping with fine motor to promote that finger isolation. Overall, you guys did really well with this one. And which of the following, this is a really easy one, which of the following alternative mice translates head movement into cursor movement? Pretty easy on that one. Obviously a head mouse, because we're talking about head movement. Increasing the size of the font and mouse pointer on the monitor would be helpful for a client with low vision. For somebody with no vision, D, yeah, increasing the size and the font and the mouse pointer, that's not going to help them. Impaired depth perception, yeah, possibly, right? And impaired fine motor skills, yeah, increasing size of what's on the screen is not going to help, but increasing the size of like maybe the keyboard keys, you may be with an expanded keyboard, that would be good for a fine motor skill deficit. Okay, so any questions about augmentative communication or the computer access that we did tonight? There's different data collections that you can do to determine the effectiveness of the AAC selected. There's some standard ones out there, but most of the time I would say that we're not doing standard ones. We're doing more customized data collection. You know, speech therapists have their data collection. You know, if we're talking about like school environment, a lot of times it's based on IEP goals and their progress reporting. But yes, we can set up quality metrics and benchmarking data. And it's going to be somewhat individualized for the user based on how they're communicating, what they're communicating, you know, and their communication needs. But yes, we do that. I believe, Teresa, I don't know, do you know if they've set up these questions as being typical for the exam? I'm thinking these are more so just to get us thinking about, yeah, go ahead.
These, you mean these sample questions?
Yes.
I mean, the idea is to be able to help you get your confidence in the different areas and get you a sense of where you need to spend more time. And then the second area is the exam questions are very much situation based. They're probably longer cases, like we have a key guard is used to. They'll give you a scenario with like a patient example and then looking for the application of the keyboard. But I think the important thing is as we go back and explain why the others are the wrong answer and why the right one was the best answer are the strategies that you guys could use for the exam. So I don't know if that answered your question, Bill.
Yeah, more case studies,
Yeah,
like simple, quick little case studies.
I was going to say not lengthy, but
Yeah.
scenario based. So
Mhm.
thinking of a situation you have in your clinic, and then how would you apply some of these principles? It's all multiple choice.
All right, so any other questions? George, that's a good question. I think as long as it runs, as long as you can run the GoToMeeting, you should be able to use another device. Yeah, and next week on Tuesday, we'll be doing electronic aids for daily living and sensory, and then we'll be starting we'll start talking about the case studies for the final class next Thursday. All right, so if there's no other questions, we'll just hang on for another minute or so, but if not, have a great evening and have a great weekend, and we will talk to you guys again on Tuesday.